Superman 2025 review. I tried to do this before and I ended up in a rambling mess. I'm going to do a spoiler-free section here. The only closest things that will be to a spoiler, before you click off, just listen to me, are things like, hey, we've seen trailers, hey, we've seen promotional images. Like, I'm looking right now at posters, you know? So we might see some of that in this section. I'm going to avoid any spoilers. There might be one or two things that I need to vaguely touch on to make a point, but I'll actually tell you what they are in the spoiler section. So if you want to just skip to the detailed spoiler section, you can. However, there might be some things that I address in this section that I don't address in that section because, like, color grading, cinematography, I probably don't need to get into those in spoilers, right? That kind of stuff I'll talk about here, and the story structure, things like that. To qualify who I am, you shouldn't have to do this, but I will. I've done probably 40 or 50 film reviews so far on this channel. Some of them are good, some of them are probably god-awful because they're old. I do have a degree in writing. I did go to school for it. Doesn't make me smarter than anyone else, but like if somebody says I don't understand stories, that's just a dumb argument. And I do read Superman comics. I love Superman comics, but one of my favorite versions of Superman is probably the DCEU or even the version in All-Star Superman. Now, going into this, I was a bit skeptical because, and this is one of the things we do have to touch on, we knew going into this that this movie does not focus on origin stories. I think that's pretty widely known. James Gunn has said it over and over again. Hey, you've seen Krypton, you've seen the explosion, you've seen all that stuff. We don't need to show that. I get it, but... and this was an issue I did have with the movie that I did overall like, by the way, before I get crucified here. I noticed that with that element, there were certain key lore changes that they tried to introduce, which we'll talk about in spoilers, which could have been a lot better explored if we had maybe seen kind of an opening similar to Man of Steel. And I'm not saying that like the Snyder fanboy, I love everything. No, I don't. I mean, I liked those movies. I understand why people didn't. And that's okay. But I do think that seeing that Krypton origin story would have helped me from the beginning and would have helped like new viewers from the beginning, just because it's always a slightly different story, right? Like it's always the same framework, but then it's different. And they try to work a thing into this movie that's very different, which we'll talk about in spoilers, that actually did piss me off. Like it actually frustrated me. And I did not like that. However, I loved things like the cinematography. I thought this movie looked beautiful. I thought that the colors were great. I thought, finally, we're out of this grayish era of superhero movies. You can like the cinematography and the color grading and all that of the Snyder films or of any of the previous films, but like, I personally feel that movies like the Dark Knight trilogy or then the Snyder movies, you know, they tried to be a little more gray, and it worked for them, but I don't want it for every DC movie. So I was very happy to see that this is colorful. This is a colorful movie. It is a comic book movie. It is a movie that's not afraid to lean into the elements of being a comic book movie. You know, even from the trailers, you see things like Superman's robots in the fortress. Those are kinds of things, or crypto. Those are kinds of things that I think a lot of previous takes do lack a little bit. You know, it's like you're trying to, with movies, you're trying to make a movie, right? And you're trying to make it appeal to the widest audience possible. So you're like, okay, well, it can be a comic book movie, but it can't go too far. I didn't feel that with this movie, and I like that, by the way. I don't want these movies to be ashamed of what they are. To quote Harry Osborn, or Norman Osborn, never be ashamed of who you are, Harry. I want these movies to feel like, in some way, they're completely unashamed of being related to comic books. They're unashamed of their source material. They embrace it. I don't want the X-Men Fox debacle again. Still really love those movies, actually. But in general, like where it's kind of like David Hayter years later is revealing, hey, I had to fight to keep Wolverine a Canadian. Or, you know, you were even seeing things like, yeah, we considered giving them superhero suits, but we thought it was stupid. It's like, I don't want that. You know what I mean? I want this movie to lean into the superhero and the comic book stuff, and I like that a lot. I really enjoyed a lot of things about this movie, personally, And I did actually buy this movie. Like, I did pre-order the Steelbook. I do want to give this new universe a chance. Full disclosure, I'm kind of tired of new DC universes. I'm tired of the comic books constantly switching, like retconning things, jumping into a different continuity, or changing the continuity to fit the story they want to tell now with some new crisis. The animated universes, I'm kind of tired of them switching. So going into this, I was kind of skeptical on a new universe because I'm like, how many new universes does DC need? Not just live action, but in general. Like, how many do we need? Like, we have 100 we could go back to. And so I was kind of skeptical of that. They drop you right into the story in a way that I think is very good and actually gets the ball moving, gets it rolling. It gets people to enjoy the meat and potatoes of like a Superman story without seeing, what would you say, a third reiteration of his origin. And so like for those people, I completely understand why a lot of people want to jump past that. It's like we've seen it with the Reeve movies, we've seen it with Smallville, we've seen it with, to some extent, Superman and Lois, although it also kind of jumps past it, but it does give flashbacks, right? We've seen it with, the Man of Steel movies. I was trying to think if I'm missing anything here. We've seen it with the DCEU, probably, I think the DCAMU kind of got into it. It's like, if you're a fan of this character, you've probably seen the story, and I get that. I, though, as a storyteller, because, and story enjoyer, I also do like seeing those early years. I really like seeing, how did Superman get here? What did this version of Superman do to interact with Lois? What did this version of Superman do? You know what I mean? So my thing is like, it's kind of twofold. It's like, I'm tired of reboots, but if you're gonna reboot, I do want to see pretty much the beginning of the story. I think for me, it's like overall, this captured the heart of who Superman is very well. It captured this heart of being a hero, valuing life, really, really trying to protect people. And that's something I think previous versions of the character had a hard time with. It's like, how do we have this larger than life character, and he's going to fight monsters and titans and gods and all these things, but he cares about the little guy. That's hard to do. It's hard to put Superman fighting Darkseid in a movie alongside Superman saving a cat out of a tree. Now, both are very Superman. That's the thing that I think people forget. Both are very Superman, fighting against tyrants, but being willing to take time for the little guy. They're both Superman, right? And so it's like, how do you work that into a narrative, one narrative? That can be difficult. And I think this movie did a very good job of dealing with that. I think it did a very good job of trying to show us both a Superman who cares about everyone and a Superman who is larger than life, but still a person, I love that they gave him a lot of lines. I think an issue I've had with previous Superman movies is not letting Superman talk enough. They did a great job with that. I love the casting around pretty much everybody. I'm looking at a thing, if you're like, why is he looking past me? I'm looking at a thing on my computer, like kind of like about character breakdowns and stuff to remember everybody. And there wasn't anybody I felt like shouldn't have been here. And there wasn't a character that I felt like didn't have a narrative purpose. There was no like Chekhov's gun problem of characters that were here for no reason. Why the hell are you here? I didn't feel that in this movie, and I really liked that. The suit design works great in this film. I know some people were skeptical of it ahead of time. There are small things I can say, like, I would save the Kingdom Come Superman logo for a different movie probably, but at the same time, it's such a great crest. It's a great logo. This is a good suit. Would I want it to change to be a little bit more like Superman comic booky maybe later? Yeah, probably. But I think this is a very good year 3-ish Superman suit. Everything makes sense there. The way they handle the fortress, without getting into spoilers, it's in all of the promotional material, all of the trailers. Beautiful. Felt like it was right out of a comic book. Like, there's a lot of things I love about this movie, and I want that to be clear. But there were things that frustrated me immensely as well, which I'd like to talk about for a few minutes, that I feel like a lot of people online either don't care about, don't notice, or are kind of downplaying, that I do think matter to the world and lore of who this character is. Like, at his heart, we're ending the spoiler-free section. At the heart of the movie, This is a Superman movie about Superman. I really like that. Who feels like he is Superman. He has a lot of lines. We actually get to hear him talk. We actually get to see who he is a little more. The characters have purpose. The colors are amazing. The cinematography is amazing. I don't rate movies out of 10, but like if I were to, it would be more on the positive side. Like far more on the positive side for this movie for me than the negative. As a film, okay? That said, we also, and we're going to move into spoilers now, so spoiler warning here. I am very frustrated with a key element of this movie that really, really bummed me out, and that is how it handled the Kryptonian heritage of Superman. And it's something that I actually thought it's interesting because I think maybe the previous iteration of Superman might have handled the Kryptonian heritage better, but handled the humanity not as well. You know, like handled the human side of the character not as personally. And I think that's something a lot of people didn't connect with because we're human, right? We're not Kryptonian. So we're all going to lean more into the human aspect of Superman. That's what we are. That's what Superman is to us, right? But that said, a big thing that James Gunn did going into this movie and other people did going into this movie was talk about this narrative that this is an immigrant story. I have no problem with that, by the way, before you keyboard warriors get mad. That this is a story about a character from somewhere learning to integrate into a society, but also, you know, like honoring the past, all this stuff, right? An immigrant story. I mean, that's what it is. Like if you have an immigrant story, like let's say you're an immigrant from, and it's the easiest one off the top of my head, Mexico, and you're an immigrant to the United States, I personally believe the way to handle that is not a healthy, like, it wouldn't be healthy to say, yes, kill the past, forget it. You know what I mean? It would be like you embrace your heritage. You also bring all those positives and things like that into where you're going and you try to make that place better, right? And then you fit into that society. I mean, that's how it's always worked, but like without eliminating one part or the other. This movie to me felt like it was very much leaning into the Krypton was bad kind of idea, which is one that we have seen discussed or at least alluded to in comic books and material before. And I always see people, the few people who have brought this point up and been frustrated by it have been shut down by, well, it was in issue 532 of Superman's butt crack versus Jimmy Olsen's peen. You should have read it in 1972. John Byrne's run of Man of Steel gets into this, by the way. It gets into like the alien side of Krypton and like Superman kind of pushing it away a little more to be more human. Smallville gets into this some, the show. People misunderstood it. I see everybody make a point about this and say Jor-El was evil in Smallville. No, he wasn't. There were 2 Jor-Els, technically 3, because Smallville is a soap opera. It's complicated, just like a comic book. And there's a Jor-El clone. There is the original Jor-El, who's very good. And then there is an AI named Jor-El that the original Jor-El tried to put his brain consciousness, copy it into, to give Superman a kind of father figure / someone to teach him on Earth, right? The AI is misguided. It's doing its best, but at the end of the day, it's a computer. That's the one people call evil. It never was, but it was misguided. The normal Jor-El was good, wanted the best for Clark, was not a Kryptonian supremacist or anything like that. The clone, I'm going to be honest, I don't fully remember everything about the clone. It was like season 9. It wasn't a character that mattered that much. I feel like people are using other lore bits to justify this change in the message to Superman from the House of El, where they're basically saying, hey, go to Earth and, you know, we love you. But then the second half of the message is recovered and it's basically also reproduce with as many women as you can, save the Kryptonian genes, all this stuff. It feels very Zod-like. And I don't know why this change was made to the Kryptonian lore. This is probably the biggest problem I have with this movie. And it's something I couldn't talk about in the spoiler-free section. This is something that almost ruined the movie for me. And that's because I am a big Superman nerd. You know, I love this stuff. And someone's going to say, oh, well, it's for the general audience. It's for the... It clearly wasn't mainly for the general audience. It leaned really far into being a comic book movie. So it was for people like me as well. And there's this whole change in here where basically it's almost like rapey, where it's take a harem and have as many, wives as you can and have as many babies as you can. And this felt to me very much like the third time DC has done this in recent years. And each time they do it, whether it's fair or not to hold this against the movie because other movies did it, I get more tired of it. I could handle it in Joker, where it's like, actually Thomas Wayne was a piece of shit because it was a totally alternate universe. It was a standalone universe. It was its own thing. Joker 2 was an absolute train wreck of a movie. I hated it. But Joker 1, it's like, okay, I can buy that. The Batman, it was like, hey, maybe the Waynes were not good people. And then it was like, actually, they were mostly good people. They just made some mistakes. Fine. Then the third time we get to it, and we're on a new universe, and it's actually the House of L was pretty fucked up. They were pretty much Kryptonian supremacists, and they kind of pushed a eugenics line of go and sleep with as many women as you can to have as many babies as you can. This felt very Brightburn to me, which James Gunn was also connected to as a producer, where it was, what if Superman was sent here, Dollar Store Superman, Mooper-san, or something like that. I hope that wasn't a slur. What if he was sent here and he was instead evil? Like he was misguided, he had some problems, his parents didn't know how to deal with him on Earth, and then the ship, like the actual message, turned him evil. And it kind of goes into that a little bit. Now, I will say this. I really do appreciate the idea of Superman saying, hey, I'm not necessarily who anyone makes me. I can choose to be a good man. I understand that message. I get it. It's good. I don't know if Superman's the one necessarily to make that message from out of this change. Because for me, if this is an immigrant story, that Kryptonian heritage does still need to be important, There needs to be more to this, and future movies could fix this. Future movies could say, yes, the linguists were correct, but they interpreted it way too literally. That's not what it meant, or anything like that. Or they could say it actually was manipulated by Lex, or he did pay these people to say this, things like this. But that really bummed me out. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I don't want this to be a 45-minute movie review. That change, though, really hurt the movie for me a lot, because as a Superman fan, I've always found that he is more human than Kryptonian. It's very important. It's something the movie gets into, and I do care about, and I love that they get into that. Like, at his heart, Superman's a human. He's not a Kryptonian. We see him in DCEU. I mean, he is biologically, but in his heart, he's supposed to be the best of what Krypton could be and the best of what Earth should aspire to be. He's supposed to be both, right? And in some ways, that's good. Like, he can still be that. Like, maybe he takes this and it's like, well, Krypton shouldn't have been that way. I'm going to be the way Krypton should have been. But, like, Jor-El being a good and honorable man, it's an important part of Superman's history. To me, this kind of change would be like, actually, Uncle Ben didn't die because you screwed up, Peter. He died because he was going to cheat on his wife. It's like, because he was kind of a shitty person, he died. Or like, actually, Bruce, your parents didn't die in that alley. They faked their death to leave you alone. You know what I mean? It's like, these soap opera ass changes are what that felt like to me. And that could have been fixed in the very end by just saying, actually, it was faked. This was done to tarnish his reputation. That's not what they said. You could have just completely eliminated this entire point from my review, which was like a probably 7 to 10 minute point. And I would have loved the movie so much more. It rubs me the wrong way to say this is an immigrant story, but then say that where you immigrated from was evil. But you have to be better than that. I don't want to get overtly political here, regardless of where you're from. I don't think anyone thinks all immigration is bad or anything like that. I know it's a hot button topic right now. But I think that that's kind of a dangerous message that if it was in anything else could be construed as like extremely racist. And I don't throw that word around like almost ever. I think it's overly thrown around in our society. It's been devalued. But that kind of took me aback. Like, I think that they need to fix this going forward. I think there needs to be some kind of change to that. I'm totally fine with him viewing Ma and Pa Kent more as his parents. He absolutely should. They're the ones who raised him. They loved him. And I love the way that they show those characters in this movie. It's just that one element really hurt the movie for me. But that said, I love the relationship between Lois and Superman in this. You know, the way that David plays Superman, I really liked it. It did feel very human. And the way that him and Lois interact in this relationship that's not perfect, where it's like one person is weird and one other person is weird for a human. I liked that a lot. I thought that was very well done. This is probably some of the most chemistry I've seen on screen from a Superman and a Lois. You know, I think they did a very good job. The only ones I can think of that like relate to me, like in terms of chemistry, are maybe the show Superman and Lois and the show Smallville, maybe. Like Tom Welling and Erica Durance obviously did a really good job in that. But for me, I thought that was incredible. Like the way that they portray that relationship to me was way, way, way better than I've seen in a lot of Superman iterations. And I'm talking about this in a way where I'm trying not to completely shit on the Snyderverse, because I actually like the Snyderverse. I don't think this needs to be an either or. Like you can like those movies. Like I really like Man of Steel. You can like those movies and still like this movie, right? And I've made reviews on some of those movies, and I've told you I've got a lot of problems with some of those movies too. That's unfortunately how it is. I think too, when you grow up loving these characters, is like you will have things that you want to see. And that's why it's hard. That's why in the spoiler-free section, I tried to be a lot easier and more lenient on the movie, because as a movie, it's a good movie. You know, like it's, I think, well-paced. I know a lot of people said the pacing's bad. I thought it wasn't. The color grading is spectacular. The cinematography is very good. The displays of the heroes are very good. Nobody feels shafted. I mean, the fact that freaking Guy Gardner got some respect on screen. Incredible. I love that kind of thing. You know, seeing Hawkgirl, seeing Mr. Terrific. These actors did an amazing job bringing these characters to life. I got to see Easter eggs that, you know, some people probably didn't even notice, and there's a lot of people who probably noticed more than me. Seeing things like, Stag Industries, reference to that. Seeing things like, there was another key one I was thinking of right now. Well, Maxwell Lord is a pretty obvious one. You know, these kinds of things I think were really, really fun. I just think that for me, those key lore changes really frustrated me. But it's like how the actors played the parts themselves, things like that. I thought those were all very good. I thought in a lot of ways, this felt like a Superman comic book brought to life. And I really do appreciate that. There were a lot of weird criticisms I saw of this movie ahead of time that I disagree with. Like, I was not sure about Nicholas Hoult because I just couldn't see him as Lex. He did an amazing job as Lex. I saw criticisms of things like Superman getting hurt. Okay, Superman does get hurt if he fights something strong enough. I mean, the DCEU feels like Superman spends half of his screen time on his ass, trying to reason with people, trying to get them to stop. This Superman did that, by the way. He actually tried to reason with people, calm them down, de-escalate. That was done so well. So it's like, I think you're noticing, hopefully, if you made it to this point in my review, I enjoyed a lot more about this movie than I didn't. But it wasn't a perfect Superman movie to me. I am frustrated about that key lore change. I'm a little frustrated about also how far in the movie starts. And what I mean about that is a few years in, you can do. However, I would have loved to have seen the early years of this Superman. I know there's some kind of little prequel young adult novel. To me, that's not the same as making a movie. This is the Star Wars problem where you show a lot of development off screen. I would have loved to have seen that here. It's like, how did this Superman and Lois meet? I would have liked to have seen that. How did Superman start finding out he had powers and how did he deal with that? I would have liked to have seen that. I understand why we didn't, and I understand why a lot of you didn't want to see that. I get that. I'm just telling you what I would have liked to have seen from a new universe. I'm also kind of concerned in one way where they're also talking about the brave and the bold for Batman, and they're talking about jumping ahead to Damian Wayne, and I talked about this a little bit on my Twitter, where I said that I think that's a mistake. Like, you can jump a couple years into someone, and maybe that works, but if we're jumping to, like, the 4th or 5th Robin, We're skipping characters. I mean, assuming they even existed in this universe, we're skipping Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, Tim Drake, I believe Stephanie Brown, although that one's very short-lived. We're skipping things like this to go all the way to Damien. I don't know. You get what I'm saying? Like, to me, the fact they were willing to already jump ahead in this movie, it's like, okay, but that's the farthest you can jump ahead. A big criticism of, like, the DCEU was jumping in at characters' midpoints and having no build up to them. Characters like Batfleck. Big criticism from people was, hey, what about the early years of this guy? How'd he get this way? Why the hell are we jumping in when he's like 2 decades into being Batman? So the jumping in point for me in Superman was done well. There were other people I know it wasn't done well for. Like, my wife Jill liked the movie a lot, but she's a newer Superman fan. She hasn't seen that origin as many times. And to her, she was kind of like, I would have really appreciated to see that again, far more than I was. And then there was like T I went with, my friend, and he said, well, I've seen it a billion times. I don't need to see it. So it's like you have very opposite versions of fans right there and fan reactions. And then I feel like I'm a little bit in the middle where I'm like, I just would have liked to have seen it out of principle of storytelling. This is a brief aside from the future, by the way. Also, sorry if this microphone sounds better than my visual one. I'm going to do my best to mess with that in the future, but I didn't have time to redo this whole thing. I wanted to say that I hope I'm not coming off too harshly on this movie, because I do actually like it, and I think the positives outweigh the negatives. But another thing to me that is a problem I've had with like every superhero movie, probably in the last decade, well, not every movie, but most movies, especially Marvel movies, is comedy. Now, I get that I probably am not the best barometer all the time for what's funny. Like, I do try to do comedy on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays. I do try to make people laugh, and there are things that make me laugh. However, I think that with superhero movies, a lot of the times there's this really big urge on a writer's standpoint, or a director, or a dialogue specialist. I don't really know whose push it is, but there's a push to almost like try to insert funny stuff to offset serious themes, or offset like a very serious moment. Like, for example, near the end of this movie, there's this entire thing where Superman is having this almost moral dialogue showdown with Lex Luthor, where I feel like there was more that could have even been said in this showdown, and I feel like there's more that would have been said, but instead it's kind of just interrupted by a slapstick. Krypto shows up and tries to maul Lex. It's like, on its own as a thing happening, it's amusing. But in terms of interrupting the scene, I actually did notice a few different things do this, where there was a scene interrupted by something that was meant to be funny, or like maybe the movie slowed down to try to be funny, like Mr. Terrific's garage door. Just things like that, where they were trying really hard to do some kind of like funny distraction. Like, it kind of felt like dangling the keys, like, look over here, isn't this interesting? But the movie was already interesting at that point. It didn't need it. So I'm not saying that there was nothing funny in the movie. I would say, like, if the movie made 10 jokes, to me, probably 2 of them I didn't register as jokes. Probably 2 or 3 of them, or 4 of them, I didn't find funny at all. And the other 3 or 4 of them I found funny. But to me, that's not a very good breakdown, that I'm finding like 30%-ish of your humor funny. I know someone will just say, why don't you live a little? You probably just don't find it funny. But, it is funny. You're just stupid. But I just think that, to me, I'm getting a little tired of the trope of superhero movies interrupting serious moments to try to make me laugh. I think there's other ways to incorporate humor into your film that don't need to be a negative detriment to emotional moments. I could levy that criticism against almost every Marvel Cinematic Universe film in existence, and I still like most of them. So again, it doesn't make me not like this movie. I just wish that had been changed. For characters, I really liked everybody, like I said. I thought Metamorpho was done really well. I thought that Rick Flag being in here was done well. Lois was great. Eve was great. Like, I can't think of anybody that was bad. Perry was great. I can't think of anybody who didn't feel like who they were supposed to be. I can't think of anybody who did a bad job. These actors really did, in a lot of ways, bring a comic book to life. It's that I really appreciate. I really appreciate not being ashamed of any of that, not being like, this is stupid. I like those interactions. I like that a lot. To me, though, it does feel a little bit like jumping into act 2 of a story. I don't think the transition from the DCEU was good at all. If they were going to do a reboot, I would have appreciated just a straight up clean slate of everyone. Not seeing John Cena back as Peacemaker, not seeing back people from the Suicide Squad, nothing. Just a totally clean slate break. That's not what this was. There was still weird little stuff like that to me at this point just is kind of confusing to the general audience. But it's like you have to view it 3 ways. You view it as a movie, you view it as a Superman movie, right? The source material. And you view it as a cinematic universe film, like the start to an on-screen cinematic universe, other than, of course, things like Creature Commandos, which, let's just be honest with ourselves, a lot of people who went to see this movie did not watch that, and that's okay. Just like a lot of people who went to see a Marvel movie didn't watch WandaVision, or didn't watch, Loki, or things like that. When you separate the mediums, that's what's going to happen, and that's okay. So to most people, this is the beginning of the on-screen DC universe that they're going to care about. They're going to go see the movies. I like jumping right into the action on one hand. On the other hand, I do think that it's a bad transition to jump right into the action and not see anything about this new universe. But also, it's like weirdly tied to the DCEU in a way, with like Peacemaker and characters like that still being here. I think we should have just gotten rid of all of that. I understand James Gunn worked on The Suicide Squad. I love The Suicide Squad. I still think a clean break would have helped this movie. It's like, overall, I really did like it, but I am conflicted on key parts of it. And I am conflicted on the immigrant story. I'm conflicted on the starting point. I'm conflicted on what we're going to do in the future for starting points. Because, like, if this movie was an indicator, I'm conflicted on, do we do that with Batman? How far do we jump in? Okay, that's too far. Those things kind of have me concerned. I really do think the Kryptonian heritage needs to be addressed in a follow-up movie, and I really hope it is. Like, I hope in some way Supergirl addresses this, because it's my biggest problem I have with the movie, and I don't care if other things have done a similar thing in the past. I've always thought that was a bad idea, to do that in a mainline Superman universe. I've always thought that was a bad idea. The suit is great, the characters are great, the acting is great, the cinematography is great, the color grading is great. It feels like a comic book. I enjoyed it. I already bought the movie. I know there's going to be a lot of people who have a problem with my review because I didn't unilaterally love or hate this. I get that. You're not allowed to enjoy the Zack Snyder movies but also like this. You're not allowed to have criticisms of the Zack Snyder movies but like this. You're not allowed to criticize this movie by some people because it's like the perfect Superman movie. People are free to have their opinions. On my opinion, that's fine. If you want to make a logical argument, I'd love to see it, if it's respectful. But at the end of the day, it's a review. It's not a debate. And this is just kind of how I felt about the movie. I really like it. I liked it enough to buy it. I do have some concerns going forward, but I hope for the best. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do hope you enjoyed the movie review. I know it's a little longer, but it is one that matters to me a lot. I love Superman. He's a very important character to me, a very important character to my life. And he's an important character to a lot of people. And that's why I'm a little protective of the character, I guess, in some ways. But interested to hear your thoughts. If you do support this channel, you want to support this channel, you can use our Fortnite code. Obviously, they have Superman in the store, or not in the store, but in the game right now, and other stuff in the store. You can check out our store, CosmoBunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more made out of recycled paper from damaged comic books. We take those, we turn them into a new medium transformatively, and recycle all of the paper. So we save some of that paper out of landfills, turn it into something new transformatively for your home, and then make sure the rest doesn't go into landfills. And then, of course, as well, we do have our own code for that, which is DJAY123 as well. Gets you 10% off your first purchase there. And finally, my wife Jill also does make handmade resin, beautiful jewelry pieces, beaded jewelry, all kinds of stuff over there. I love it very much, and I really did enjoy this movie. I hope that comes through. One thing I didn't mention in closing that I loved was crypto. I adored the way they incorporated crypto into this movie. I thought it was so fun. I loved it. that kind of thing is like unabashedly comic book. And I know a lot of people won't make it to this point in my review. They'll watch like 5 minutes and assume I didn't like the movie. That's not the case. I just am protective of the Superman character, and I hope that they do right by that element of his heritage in the future, because it does matter. I get the humanity matters more. I've always understood that. I'm not a freaking idiot. Okay, you don't have to explain that to me. But the other does still matter to Superman. And the ending of this movie feels like it's kind of him saying, they were bad, I'm going to be done with that. I hope that they fix that in the future. So let me know what you think. Have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.